Well, you had all, if you want smells, you had more smells than you have now. Like you had Denny's meat factory, and the pong was like the Luton Girls Choir rising up off it.
People opened each other's doors then.
Yeah.
They didn't knock. There was always keys in the door, and your mother went, Kitty, Kitty. Her lovely northern accent.
Or if you had 600 cattle on Ballybricken on a fair day, and the fire brigade coming up the next day with fire hoses and sweeping Ballybricken down the glen to the river.
Over here on the left, we had a Healy's wall there, we were playing handball on the wall, and the man in the shop used to come out when he'd be quiet in the shop, and he'd have a game with us.
Then there were the nicer smells, like the fresh bread. Like, I mean, you had Lodge's Bakery down here, you had O'Neill's Bakery down here, and you had the big one, O'Brien's Bakery.
You know, and then we'd have a game of ball in the street, and if we hit a certain door in the street, the ball was taken in and she'd give it back to your court. Kathleen Hearn.
All types of smells, and all of them overridden by horse manure.
We played on the street, the guards would come around, we played hurling.
And the neighbours in the street were wonderful. You could leave the key in the door all night.
Going from the Lady Lane Nuns Convent into the garden. And if the ball went into the garden, you really were in trouble. You had to go into Una Neary's house and climb over her wall. She'd let you in.
We used to have a shop at the end of the street here where you could get the book by the week. No, I'd get the few groceries and things on the book.
I went into Cook's, who were on the other side. But if your mother knew you, if the nuns came down to your father and mother, or they told a priest called Father Hallinan, if they came down to your house, you were in deep trouble.
Yeah. A lot of people say the river was manky and dirty. Well, actually, it wasn't. It was much cleaner then than it is now.
And sometimes then when you run short of a little bit of tea or a bit of sugar, you go over with your cup and you say, "Me mammy want a sup of milk," and you go, or sugar, whatever you want, and you go back with your little thing then, bring back your sugar or carrot or turnip, whatever you got.
Nearly half the town used to come down swimming there when the tide came in, you know. I was going to say something there about sometimes what you'd have to avoid in the river, but I won't mention that.
How would you know, the big question was, how would you know that the jute factory dance was on? Well, it was easy. You couldn't get a roller in Waterford for love or money. They were bought up. Yeah, these are the things in the hair, you know, the rollers.
But we were never long distance swimmers. We were very, very fast swimmers because you'd have to get out of the way if something came floating down towards you.
And we enjoyed ourselves. And everybody was contented, and we didn't know any better. And we just got a penny a week to spend.
We were all just more or less from the one area. And like, being from the one area, we all had inner city values. In my opinion, what I would call inner city values, which meant like that you were nice to old people. There was things you wouldn't do, like knock on doors against elderly people. There was things you would do messages for elderly people and neighbours and all that.
The population of the city then was much bigger than it is now. There was more people living in the centre of the city.
The beach out here is standing, would have defended the whole big beach that ran from what people would now think of as Shaw's up as far as Bilberry Rock.
I was born just underneath this castle here, is one of the houses. There was 4 houses here, and that was the last one under the castle. That's where I was born, and that's where I grew up, right here in Jenkins Lane. I went on to go to the school then here in St. Patrick's, which is just opposite the church, now gone unfortunately. And I also served on the altar in St. Patrick's.
Well, we're standing outside the Roman Catholic St. Patrick's church here, down in Georgia Street, just off Georgia Street. The church itself dates from around 1742. It was originally founded by the Jesuits, and very interesting church insofar as that when the penal laws existed in Canada, Newfoundland, and there was no priest allowed to practice there, the Waterford people in Newfoundland would take their children back from Newfoundland and have them baptised here in St. Patrick's.
There was 4 small houses, and then there was 2 big tenement houses, which each tenement housed 6 families, you know, 2, 2 and 2.
Yes, I remember all the people down there. It was great, and the castle was open then. Herons had it, and we could play in there.
Toilets were outdoor toilet here. It was just at the back of us here. You had an outdoor toilet, and then you had a pump, a running pump here, one of the old type pumps, and you got your buckets of water from the pump, brought them to your house and used them for your washing up, to make your tea and what have you.
We used to climb over the wall of the cliff there, and the poor devils would be going out to the toilet, we'd be throwing stones down on them.
This was St. Patrick's, and over here on my right, where the statue is, just down from that, you're 2 steps going down into a door that brought you into the school, and the school was right behind us. It was 2 rooms, the ground floor and top floor, and you had 6 classes. You had 1st, 2nd and 3rd in the ground floor, and you had 4th, 5th and 6th in the top floor. And you had 2 Christian brothers from Mount Sion that came down.
This is a relatively new entrance. The old entrance is just down a little bit there by Welch's pub, and that was the original entrance in, and it kind of went in, it turned left, and that was the entrance then into the church.
Shoes, every January the corporation gave out shoes to different schools. St. Patrick's was only a very small school, so they didn't get many pairs of shoes, but Mount Sion did. And the 2 brothers that were teaching here used to come down most mornings, and they'd have shoes in their pocket, their big cassock, and they'd have a right and a left shoe, and they'd come into the class and they'd say, hands up those who wear a number 5 shoe, and maybe 2 or 3 hands go up and say, okay, I'm thinking of a number between 10. And whoever got the number, they got a pair of shoes to wear. And, some of them had shoes, but they were nothing what they had on their feet. But most of them hadn't got any shoes. And that's how the brothers did it, And then a lot of them didn't, we had lunch or a break for dinner at 1 o'clock, but a lot of them never went home because there was no dinner to go to.
Right, we're standing here in Railway Square now at the Watchtower. We're looking up Castle Street, and I suppose this gives you the best idea in Waterford of what the city would have looked from outside. A line of wall with castles and towers all the way along it. People forget that we have, I suppose, more city walls in Waterford than most places in Ireland.
Well, the Manor School originated in 1850. There was an actual barracks next to the school itself, and both were given to the Bishop of Waterford by the Quakers. And he set it up originally as a training school for priests. And then the barracks was used. The reason it was called a barracks because the RIC moved in and they used it as well.
I went to school in the Manor CBS, and there was Castle's Bugs O'Reilly. I shouldn't say Bugs, Pat O'Reilly, but he was known with everybody as Bugs. His mother fed us many and many a time, gave us a sandwich, or not necessarily a sandwich, but bread with butter and maybe sugar sprinkled on it, And Frank Coughlin, the late actor, lived up around the corner in Castle Terrace, And we used to play in the castle. We were chucking bricks off the castle and sods off the castle, and Dominic Fardy had a castle in Mendicity Lane on the opposite side of the road, next to the railway station.
But the school itself was run by the Christian Brothers, and they came from Mount Sion. Every day they lived in Mount Sion, they came down, and we were sort of a subsidiary of Mount Sion, so we also got subsidiary teachers.
You were talking about religion. I remember years ago when I was small, 6 or 7, my father had a brother, and he had a priest. His son was a priest, And when we used to go down to Camp Hyde and visit him, he'd always tell you when you go down, to get up and kind of want to spout him. And if you met him on the footpath, stand off the footpath, step off, and let him have the right of the way. That kind of the way things are kind of happening. You know what I mean? You look at it now
It wasn't that vicious as people would tell you it was. It was strict. It was cane was used, and if you stepped out of line, you got a few lashes with the cane, or a leather. The brothers used to carry up the sleeves. If you did your homework and whatever, if you didn't get into trouble, you were just grand. There was no problem. I got a couple of lashings with the cane, and that was because there was an outside stairs in the school, and at the top of the stairs, the bell was kept. So after each break, somebody was sent up to ring the bell. But for some reason, I don't even know why, but there was 10 of us hanging around by the end of the stairs. And the Christian Brothers used to walk up and down the yard. And as they were coming up towards us, they would nod at somebody to go up and ring the bell. But of course, 10 of us dashed up the stairs. And then there was a big kind of a push and shove to who was going to get the bell to ring it. We were 7 or 8 or 9 years of age. And this headmaster just appeared behind us with the cane, and he just lashed the daylights out of us for about 5 minutes. So that's the first time anybody ever heard of Riverdance. And we were hopping all over the place with it.
Now, where I'm standing at the moment is a laneway, and we believe it's the oldest intact laneway in the city of Waterford at present. It hasn't been altered from at least the year 1700. This complex consisted of the Leper Hospital, which ran up along here, and then we had Lord Tyrone's Infirmary, which was also a part of this complex. And this lane ran out onto Stephen Street, and this was the entrance way into the Leper Hospital.
De La Salle was founded in 1928, and you can see by the building itself, like, it is wearing well.
There was 2 lanes here, and they were almost parallel to each other. Right behind me here, just behind this arch, was Murphy's Lane, and further down, almost at the back here of what is the De La Salle or Stephen Street Monastery, was Usher's Arch.
We had great times. We really had great times in hard times. Don't let anyone tell you about the good old days. There's no such a thing as the good old days. They were hard times. Anytime, bear in mind, I was born in 1942. The war was still on, you know, and everything was in short supply. Everything. All the bare necessities. You had to have ration books for groceries and whatnot, and you had to have money to use the ration books, which was more important, which was in very short supply as well.
In the 1950s and 60s, pound and money would buy a gallon of petrol. It was all smuggled from someplace, you know. And also what was there, in comparison, a pound of tea was a pound.
The top of Grange Park and right around out onto John's Hill were just fields that they grew tobacco in during the war years.
The numbers getting TB had been horrific, but they began to go down quickly in the 1950s, and they came to terms with it.
Well, the trend was there was everything was made to measure. Everybody went to Mass on a Sunday. Everybody wore a suit on a Sunday. Everybody wore a waistcoat underneath, or more a sweater underneath. They wore an overcoat after it. We'd come out of a time of TB, tuberculosis. It was rampant within the country. And everybody had to wrap up for the fear that you might get this disease, because there was very little cure for it. There is a cure for TB now. But at that time, there was people dying, families would die off. So everything was about wrapping up, about thickness, about weight. An overcoat, you wouldn't be able to walk 4 miles in an overcoat. You'd fall down at the weight of it.
Well, the Scouts are there since a long, long time. I was a Scout leader for a number of years there, you know. Still flourishing. They're in their training at the moment now.
We were the only, it's probably still are, we always have been the only city centre Scout group, I suppose, you know. But up to the 60s, they would have been the only troops around. After that, the other ones would have formed in Tramore, Sacred Heart, St. Paul's, Ferrybank. All later years they would have still formed. Most of them are still there now. Actually, myself and my brother were talking the other night about when we started off. That was back in the late 60s, 70s. And annual camp in those days used to be 15 days away in West Cork or Wicklow or somewhere. And I remember we had no phone in the house, so we used to write home regularly from camp and get replies, and write home and get replies. Like, you were gone for 2 weeks basically. We'd cook everything together, and you used to have this big Dixie, as we used to call it, a big pot where you cook porridge in the morning. Why? Because half we wouldn't eat it anyway. But I regularly got the job of cleaning out the porridge Dixie, because I'd be up to no good or messing around. And in those days you had the Elson toilets, so someone had a job after a day or two to dig a hole and empty these things. There used to be kind of a tradition of polishing people at the last day on Scout camp. So you'd wake up the next morning kind of covered in polish. It used to be good fun actually, because someone would wake up and look over everyone and say, you got polished. And we don't know to have a mirror there, not realising you were black yourself as well, you know. We're Faith Lake houses now, and all the land's around it. And we used to camp there, and we had the run of the whole estate basically, which was amazing. I remember we used to get the passage bus out there sometimes, throw tents and the whole lot on the passage bus and head off out. And there was a farm out there, the brothers, we used to get go up with a can of milk to get the milk off the farmers in the morning. And we often stayed out there for a week, just basically hang around. Even in De La Salle, I suppose, strictly speaking, we only took De La Salle people for a number of years. That has changed now, because obviously we have girls in there as well. And I think that's kind of changed it. Some people argue better for worse, I don't know. Girls just kind of, they get a bit too advanced, I think, sometimes for the lads. They're too intelligent, you know. Someone decided they would start the pipe band, and they formed it, and for about 50 years or more, maybe 60 years, it was only formed from members of De La Salle Scouts. And if you grew up and left the Scouts, you left the band. A number of years ago, then that changed when we decided we could take in people from outside. A few youngsters of the past couple of years who weren't involved in scouting and came into the pipe band and have still since joined up in scouting because some of the people who are playing with were scouts and they saw the fun they were having in it, so they joined up as well. So two of them do mix well enough together, yeah.
And to be a relay race against the De La Salle College, Stephen Street and St. Declan's. All the participants and all the parents that walk on the footpath come down with him, and the pipe band would lead him into the college for the sports. And we'd all be looking out from the garden. There was 16 houses on each side. Coming in the gate, there were 16 on my right and 16 on my left. And Water Street was up to the right there. There was about 12 or 15 houses up Water Street. And what we used to do in Water Street was we'd get the wheels of a pram and we put a bit of timber on it and we'd have a trolley to go down the hill. And we had great fun. When the father died now, the neighbours were very, very good to us. Very, very good. And you cannot beat the Rocha Street gang. They were the best.
Peter Street as a street disappeared. If you come down from Ballybricken, down past the cinema in Patrick Street, go straight through the lights and walk into City Square where Mulligan's Pharmacy is on the left and it was Rocha Stores, Debenhams are on the right. That was Peter Street, and that continued through to where the Franciscan Friary is. So that street is completely gone.
Now, and you have to remember St. Francis, or the Friary as we used to call it, is not a parish. So therefore it didn't have a parish to go around. And you take it, these two priests decided to talk to a couple of lads. They were going to start it. And then they
started off by talking to the altar servers down in the church down in the Friary.
Yeah. And they start talking to, who were friends of theirs, fellas they knew and fellas they played ball with and different things. And they started the club like that.
Down Peter Street, the lower end of Peter Street, all the right-hand side, right down to one shop they called it Brnock's, which was Irish for Welsh's, at the Friary. But all there were all tenements that were knocked in the 40s.
My favourite, there was about 2 Georgian houses that were, we say, derelict looking. And the rest of them, there were actually houses with people living in Peter Street. There was O'Neill's and Sheen's and all those. They had their own houses down there. And it's only when the shopping centre went to be built and went to be bought that these houses were knocked.
The famous Cork House, you might remember the Cork House, right down the end of Patrick, across the road on the corner.
To knock it, they had to get 2 men up to sit on it and knock it in the way. They couldn't knock the building out the way because it could cause damage.
And it was so high up that they paid my father and John, I think there's 10 shillings extra, because none of them go up on it, because it kind of wobbling when he was knocking it down,
And there were 2 brothers living in Corrigan Lane here, which is just at the top of Patrick Street, and they were called the Burkies. Their surname was Burke, but they were brave men, and they sat on the walls, the outer walls, and they knocked in the building.
I mean, 10 bob is 10 bob,
We had a club down from, was it Killarney? They were actually down from Killarney.
Yeah.
And one of the lads came over, because we had a strict drink.
Absolutely.
No drink coming, no drink
yeah.
coming. And one of the lads said to me, Robbie, he said, when you go out the back, he said, there's fellas outside where the kitchen, as you go to the boys,
yes.
He said, they have naggins, so whiskey with him. Of course, Robbie jumped up and went straight out, Here's these fellas, 6 foot something, Kerry fellas out there, and they're naggins. So, how are you going? I said, lads, come here, give me that. Boom, pour them down the sink. I'm standing at the sink and saying, Robbie, you could get killed.
Oh yeah, there was a couple of pubs we had no bother getting served anyway. And then we used to buy the cider down in Elworth's and drink it down on the sheds down in Jenkins Lane. When them tenements were empty down there, that's where we drink it.
And then there was a gap between Burke's house, which was number 4, and Murphy's house, which was number 5, and we used to refer to it as the back
Back at the pump. Sure, you must remember that, Colin.
Seemingly there was a water pump there. At
I remember
one
the
stage.
water pump
yeah,
there.
I don't really remember it, but
Youngster.
but we used to have little concerts
Ah,
and
we
shows
did,
there,
yeah.
and they put a kind of a rope
Curtain,
or
a
a
thing
train,
and
and they
throw
put
it
blankets or something over it, and then you'd be queuing up to go in.
Rundle Square was a thriving place at that stage. We could field 2 football teams. The football teams were made up of families that lived in the area, mainly the Fitzgeralds.
If you're in the club, that we were given kind of that sense of responsibility to run it in the manor. Except when Vivian would be over on a Saturday night and he'd be looking for a respectable distance for the Holy Spirit.
The Halpins, the Troys, and then their pals would come in and they'd play football between the 2 gates. One was Knox's gate on one side of the street and the other gate was Flanagan's on the other side of the street. And they'd play there. As I said, you could have 2 football teams. That's 22 children.
We had street leagues, Water Street, the Waterside, Griffith Place, all different, John's Park, Pierce Park, all different leagues, soccer leagues. And then we had a hurling league as well.
Do you remember the song? Do you remember the song? He barred one song. Now every time Vivian would be gone, Shatem. So that was banned in the club. He had it banned in the club, but I'll always remember
as soon as
the minute Vivian would be gone outside the door, there could be news from upstairs or something that somebody's upset and they want a word. The very second he'd be gone out the door, the record be on.
In the partner, we'd be playing the street leagues and be roused, and they'd follow you up and we'd follow them. And then you get some of the bigger fellas that come down, they'd frighten them off.
Like, I mean, Nux, you were dependent on the foundry or the stones on the road for Nux. You were a toff if you had ones out of the foundry. They were the real ones. I don't know whether you can remember, you probably don't even remember. They were a little star piece of pig iron that was used. They were used in the foundry. They were sort of cut-offs of stuff that they had in the foundry itself. Like, you know, you got 5 of those.
It is.
I
It's
didn't
actually
know that now.
worldwide. And I used to think that it was called Nux, coming from Knock, the Irish for stone. But no, seemingly it was that in other places it was played with the knuck bone of sheep.
You had your 5 Nux in the hand, right? It's your turn. You threw them on the ground. Now, use terms that you won't hear now, like one-jers, 2-jers. You had to pick up one and hold in the hand, tip the ground, pick up another, you know. And then you came into the more intricate parts, like no cracks and lay the egg, you know, where you had to throw up one, lay one down, take another up and catch the other one. You know, it was well designed, like, you know. And then there was a feed down to the end of the game, 3-jers, 2-jers, 1-jers, back to the, and these things took up hours.
Well, we used to play Fantan. 10 card rummy for cigarette boxes. And they were empty at the time. And we used to go around the pubs collecting TTs. If you know what that is. You know the top on the bottle you take off with the opener? That was called a TT. Don't ask me why. Went around and we collected buckets of them. And we played Fantan or we played 30s. And that's all you lost, was whatever you collected.
There was a little windowsill, and that's where the cards were dealt, on the windowsill.
And there might be older fellas there at 15 playing it. And some of the fellas now, when they were playing the Fantan, they'd be paying for big kind of money, like, you know, in the pool. So we'd be put aside, we'd be looking at them.
They would pitch and toss harps a penny or harps a shilling and that, you know.
Oh, play them all.
Flick them up in the air, you know, and you could, as they say, bear them. If they pin them up in the air and they hit one another going up, bear them.
And you'd be pitching and tossing for the money. That's only the threepenny bits and 10 pences. And
You say you're tossing them up, you're heading them up, heads. So if you got harps, psst, you're gone.
Often we were caught playing ball on the Water Street end near the thing, and the girls would pull us up and they'd take the ball off us. They'd tell us not to be playing again.
If you got a head up, as you called it, a harp in the head, you toss them again, you know. And I seen games now tossing up in Green Street at the time, and the fellas now up there, they'd lose their wages. But some fellas now, when they were playing and they were losing a lot of money, they might have someone around the corner say, the guards. Everybody dive on the money.
You bought a rope down in George White's for 6pence. You tied a knot on the end of it and you wrapped it around the pole. Look at her laughing. Look at her. It could be used for two purposes. You put a knot on the end of it, wrapped it around the pole, and you put it up. And you could use it as a swing, going around the pole. And when it wasn't being used as a swing, your sisters or the women could use it as a skipping rope. It depends on who got up first as to who got the rope.
Mrs. Sanders here.
Oh, Mrs. Sanders.
She's a lovely woman. She's sitting there talking.
She pierced my ears full. Was thread and all the young fellas. It's her house, isn't it? No,
this one here, the red one.
This one. Is it?
And who was a great man to put up the rope for you was Eddie Wimberry. Eddie lived up our way. And if you saw Eddie coming down, Eddie had put it up. Eddie was about 6'3". And Eddie could put it higher than any of us. And he'd put the rope up like that.
Where are we? Oh no, sorry, this one here, yeah. That one.
And all the young fellas be out looking in the window. And they'd be, you know. And I says, I'll get rid of them. And she'd open the door and she'd say, go on, get off with you. So I'd be sitting there, it was, she'd have a needle, a cork out of a bottle, no ice, and she'd just stick the needle in my ears, and I used to have thread in it. So I wouldn't have the money for the earrings.
They used to actually have the rope from one side of the road to the other.
Oh, that was it. All in together, girls. Never mind the weather, girls.
Put your hat and coat on. Tell your mother you won't be long. When I count 6, do your tricks.
So I'd tear off the labels of Mrs. Breslin's bottles and I'd sell them to her.
Sell the bottle back to her.
And she'd often say to me, Brady, where'd you get them? And I'd say, oh, we went around and picked them up.
No, very small. We had a loft and 2 rooms inside, and you'd have 3 people and 4 people in the one bed. And that's how I never grew up, because I could never stretch my legs, because you might get a toe in the mouth.
Like everybody, I suppose if you looked at it, no one had anything then. You know, like it was the doors were open. I can remember down there, playing down there, and a bucket rain out of the heavens on us, and you go up and you'd be running to the road and someone come in out of that, and it was a neighbours, get in out of the rain before you go home to your mother.
In those days, kids, they played marbles as well, but they played marbles for keeps. Like, I mean, people came in and there was all these sort of arenas marked out, and people came with bags of marbles, and they went home with none or home with 2 bags, you know.
You had the shop was my favourite.
The shop, tell about the shop.
My favourite up in the lane, especially if there's after been rain. We'd take all the dog leaves and they'd be rashers. Pile them up like in a shop, put a stone on them to hold them. And someone would have a shoe box. We'd have that as a weighing scales. And you'd have cans. And you'd be taking up the water. I was always Mrs. Coffee. I always had the thing about the milk.
The top part of the shoe centre now, there was a woman there. She was Stacia Coffee. She sold milk, but she sold it going around with a can in her hand and a measure in her hand. And she always dressed in a long black coat and a black hat and black button boots on her.
My mother worked there part-time when she was about 14, delivering the milk. But she used to say, what Helen was saying about measuring it out, that Mrs. Coffee would always say, you know, she'd put in whatever and a tilly for the cat.
Muddy was a tinsmith. He had his own little shop there, and Josie, the sister. They never married, but they're very loyal to each other.
I was going with a fella in Dublin and gave me a ring, and the thing went green. So my finger swelled up. I had to go to Maddy and he was sawing it off. Cheap ring.
Business. He was all the time hammering away, and you'd hear this metal going.
In shawls. My mother used to have
My
one.
mother used to wear a shawl.
Yeah, the stuff they used to carry in them. Jesus.
Oh, it was good for a lot of people had shawls. So they used to snake the kids into the cinema every Sunday under the shawl. A lot of them, yeah, if you could get in under a jam.
And they'd be all there with the shawls and that and talking, and they'd have the half door them kind of house, you know, the top open up and the door, they'd be leaning on that. And you know, they used to have the snuff. And they'd be all having snuff.
Mrs. Brown, plainy Mrs. Brown, plainy, 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 plainy Mrs. Brown.
And they would be fighting because they'd come down from the top of the town to the cinema, so you start shouting after them and all that. And someone, there'd always a fight down the back lane behind the Savoy.
Over Mrs. Brown, over Mrs. Brown. It was on for a long time. Do you want to continue?
Over the garden wall. I left my baby fall. My mother came in and gave me a clout over the garden wall.
Lodge's Corner in Stephen Street, you could be 30 fellas there all night, and so the crack would be great. That's how they spend their night, and standing and chatting, talking about books and women, and at the time you'd be only becoming aware of that, you know.
Under Mrs. Brown, it was under your leg.
And we'd be outside the door and she'd be up in the top window, and you'd have to sing the round, and you'd have to finish, and then she'd have a load of money in her hand, and she just fired out the window.
Pennies.
Well, sure, you go in one hand and the father take it out the other hand.
What was that? Then there was two
Twirly.
balls, Mrs. Twirly.
Where you have to twirly Mrs. Brown, where you turn around and
Twirly
catch the
Mrs.
balls,
Brown.
they come back down.
Ran the kid the bird, Stevie Day is caught in the bush. Glowly, where's it? Up in the bush that I love this. Up at the high, down with the ran. I know Mrs. So-and-so is a good woman. She always gives us something. Get away from the door.
Lady Mrs. Brown, over Mrs. Brown, and you're very good. Over Mrs.
There's no such thing as having Nike or any of them sort of things. You got a pair of runners, and you get there's things like that.
You got a pair of runners, and you were the talk of the town.
Dashy Mrs. Brown. Ah, dashy, 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 dashy Mrs. Brown. Oh my God, it must be.
These would go on for hours now.
Hours. 53 years since I did something like that.
Oh, we played handball right out of the corner. Right at the corner here. There. And if you weren't playing there, you'd be playing down at the back of the Savoy, we call it. You know, you come home and your hand would be out like a balloon from playing it.
I also and ankle socks. Remember
Ankle
that?
socks,
She was
yeah.
another lady who used to go around.
Lady of the night.
Yeah.
The jail wall was just up behind it. You could go up, climb up and sit on that wall.
People say ankle socks, and you know what, look, John, I said, "Fred, she doesn't wear ankle socks." But no, it was, you see, going downtown wasn't a shopping occasion, it was a social occasion. You were meeting people. I mean, that place was alive down there.
Another social place was in summer evenings, from the clock tower down to Reginald's Tower, on to Parnell Street and back up Michael Street and down to the clock tower again. That was for walking.
Cars were a rarity. Vans, delivery vans, they were a rarity. So people walked around the centre of the city. They did what window shopping, as we used to call it when I was growing up. You'd have couples walking along the quay, looking into Shaw's window, and if you caught a couple looking into Heine's window, you knew that they were going to get engaged because they were looking at the rings. The boy might have been looking at the watches, but the girl was definitely looking at the rings.
10 rounds along the Mall. That was the, you know, when you were, from the time you were about 14, you knew every step between the Savoy back to the Savoy. We created the Viking Triangle. There's a hidden trench there from footsteps going around.
You met hundreds of people. She's nodding her head down there.
Well, I used to do it when I was very young with my aunt and her friends.
Oh,
I'd hang on to them and be walking up and down all night. The shops would be open.
Really?
The draper shop. They used to call it the midnight drapers. One shop there, Welch's.
And when I came down, I'd look for the way, which way are they all going tonight? And if they walk from here to the clock tower, I'd go that way. Because if I went the other way, I wouldn't get a walk.
By the time you get from Patrick Street corner to the Mall, there might be an hour gone. You're at the meeting somebody along the way. Because people were out, people were alive in the town.
A lot of summer evenings, boys and girls would walk down and they'd they'd walk around this walk maybe 3 or 4 times before they'd back up maybe to town and home. And if there were girls that were particularly late, you changed your journey if they were walking the same way as you, so you would meet into them on the reverse.
Packed. Absolutely packed of a Saturday. All the guys came down because they wanted to meet the girls. This place was outside Penny's, then Woolworths. It was kind of a meeting place, and there's jokes, and the 16 and 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds. They got out in their finery, you know. Nobody in denims then. They were in chinos, or they were in a decent pair of slacks and a nice sweater.
You just went downtown, yeah. That was it. You know, if you had the price to pictures, you were doing well. You really were doing well. I remember my first date. Do you remember your first date? Yeah. I remember my first date. I sold 2 stout bottles. And we went to the Regan. That's a fact. Stout bottles, 2pence each. 4pence to get into the Regal up above. Young man out of Mercy. First date. Had a penner to bullseyes. And she complained. She said they're hard. And I said, you got him soft. That was the end of the romance.
And then all of a sudden, this newfangled gadget came out, Cadbury's Club Milks. And a coffee and a club milk, perfect. It was a great way of sitting down with a girl in a cafe that you really had her impressed if you could bring her for a coffee to the Lido or the Odeon Cafe. And then you had Mackey's Cafe on the quay.
I tried to woo my wife with this. Before she was my wife.
From a very early age, I'd be looking at fellas to, to get into the pictures and all that sort of stuff. And then, if they even took you in then for into the Savoy Cafe for a cup of coffee, you'd know they really liked you.
Always be trying to make out the coupons to get you the pictures.
Sure, they be sell. You get a penny back on a bottle when you bring it back, or if you bought a comic, you get a penny on that when you bring it back. And then there was 240 pennies in a pound. You get a lot for the penny.
They say that love's a word we've only heard, but can't begin to know the meaning of.
We lived at cinema.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
And as Helen's dad just say, if life was only like the movies.
And you know what? We didn't even call them cinemas. We called them picture houses. Terminology like movies and cinemas, they weren't really used that much. It was a picture house, we called it. And the first one that came to Waterford, happened in Waterford, was built in Waterford, was the Coliseum.
The Coliseum is just down the road. It was down on Adelphi Quay. And that, there was Mrs. Kerr was the most famous manageress of the Coll.
We used to call her, what's her name? Olive. Because she was like
you know, I was a Popeye.
Popeye.
She was so tall.
Managing the kids, making sure that they didn't get up to anything. So particularly they to be shining on the back seats. But it was wonderful, They used to show the westerns, and I think every Stevenson's Day they used to give a bag of sweets, and they had an early showing of some western. I remember as a kid they had Rock Around the Clock or something there, and throws, watching the throws going down there, I was too young to go.
And any noise, or a man there, the Sheriff Kelly, they used to call him. You get a belt of a flash and the rubber ones on the back of the head. Stay quiet now. If you gave him a taffy, then he'd leave you alone.
Jam jars were very scarce, so if you bought jam or marmalade, you were expected to bring back the jar and trade it in before you got another one. And if they would scout around, if they found jam jars around the place, they'd bring them along to the Coll, and the Coll would take the jars. If a jar, a big 2-pound jar, was worth 2pence, then 2 of them would get you in.
A cheese crushed 2 or 3 children in one seat, just for the falling ups, and Hopalong Casty, and Roy Rogers, Buster Keaton, all them were the ones then.
Now, Batman and Robin is a good example.
So yeah, it's about 10 minutes to a quarter of an hour. So it finished, and you see Batman down in the pit and the spikes coming in, and you know, come back next week, will Batman survive? And we're all trying to figure out how he survived. So of course Robin had put a big pole down to stop it. He just walked up out of it.
They kicked up a stink if they were bored, and then they cheered like Billy-O if the cavalry were coming to the rescue. And so there was always an excuse for noise.
So if there's a cowboy run then from the Coliseum up to Ballybricken, there'd be 2 gangs. We say 6 would go off and 6 behind, and the baddies go off and we'd hide in the docks up in the tarpaulin, and the others would have to come in and shoot us.
But this particular day, after walking in the river, I managed to get one of those seats, and my brother was in the other one, whatever. But then I noticed my feet were still wet and there was water in my boots. So without thinking, I just emptied them out, which you would do when you're about 8, 10 or 11. And then the Sheriff Kelly was his name, he was the bouncer or whatever you want to call him. He came along and he saw the water on the floor, and he thought I was after piddling on the floor. And he grabbed me by the shoulder and fired me out of the cinema. And luckily enough, I had some money left, and I went into the deer place. The trouble was, there was only one toilet for the 2 places. So at the break, I went into the toilet. I was standing there, and the sheriff appeared alongside me. He looked down at me. I thought I threw you out of here. No, that was my brother.
And also, Theatre Royal had films going on here on different occasions. And they had a film, Mutiny on the Bounty, here. And everybody started running down to it because there was a scene of all the ladies on the island with nothing on them. And it was packed. All the boys were coming down. I think they came in twice or 3 times.
Like, I'd sneak into the Coliseum. I'd sneak into the Savoy. You couldn't sneak into the Regal because you had to go up a metal fire escape to get in.
The censorship, you know, in those days, mad. You'd see kind of a film and you're looking at it. And next minute you see a man going into a room and a woman going into a room into the bedroom. Next minute it was gone. So you didn't know what was happening. So you were trying to figure out what was going on there.
Now the Regal was a different kettle of fish now. I mean, the Regal, like, you couldn't jump. I mean, you'd die if you jumped from the upstairs down.
Have a vivid memory of we going to there for Ben-Hur, I think, was on, and Johnny was coughing, and he was coughing, and he was coughing, and everyone was looking, but I couldn't tell him to go out, but he should have really, you know, because you couldn't really hear the film. And I thought, if the lights go on, I don't want him to see who I am.
Of course, we had a Savoy cinema just around the corner from us, and that was magic. You know, we wouldn't have the money to go there. But as youngsters, we went over, particularly on a Sunday evening, we sat down over by the corner and we watched the crowds, and I mean crowds coming in to see the films.
Now, the Savoy was a different shape than the Regina. The Savoy, the chief seats were up on a kind of a little level high, and they went to the valley in the middle. Like, it was kind of like a pit for all the world. So you had to go from there over the pit to get into the deer seats. That was a bit of a challenge. You had to be fairly quick to do that.
I can remember the Savoy cinema up there, right? I can remember at that door one evening, it's around October time, and we're trying to take, and there's a queue from the Savoy to that shop door there, and that must be 80 yards.
I often saw the Savoy now. I wasn't left go when I was young. And when the door is open, you'll be lifted in with the crowd.
Mrs. Madigan from Stephen Street used to hold the line in the queue for the gods, for the whole lot of us when we go down to the matinees.
And we'd always said to her that there was some lads outside creating trouble. So she'd run out with her torch, come outside it, and one of our lads would slip in. So we'd be 2 of us telling her 3 of us, but one would slip in. But sometimes they were caught because they'd go into a seat and then there might be a guy after going to the toilet, he'd come back looking for his seat and he was caught, you know. Because at that time you'd notice every house was full. Every seat was full in there, you know.
Mr. Cunningham was a man that worked in the cinema, like Mr. Forrest still in that they worked. And when he'd see our Aunt Esther and us, he'd say, we just walk down, and he'd say, stand back there and let that woman in. She's keeping us in our job.
In the Regina, there was a different story. Everything was on the one level. And we said you had 3 or 4 planks, for the want of a better way of putting it, up close to the screen. And next to that, there was a small little kind of a divide more than a wall. So you had to go over the divide to get into the deer seats.
O'Brien's Model Bakery was there, and that was knocked down. And this was another Breen enterprise. And on the 1st of April, 1957, they opened with
High society. And there was a queue up past Patrick Street, the whole way up.
When the interval came, all the people came out because there was no shop.
There was no shop in the cinema.
In the cinema. And they used to come out and across to us. So at half time, you'd have extra people in to help you. You had the ice creams all cut ready to go. Once the interval came on, the ads came on at interval. It was a 10-minute interval. They came out and you sold as fast as you could.
Regina at the time would have had the new films, you know, and the Savoy maybe a little older. And the Regal and the Coll had the real old ones, you know. They were still showing the ones from the past generation.
It was lovely the people used to come in. They were so happy. It was their outlet. They just done nothing, only enjoyed that night. And that was all they had, like, maybe once or twice a week.
But I'd go down for my grandfather's pension. They knew me, like, you know, knew all the youngsters around. And it was 10 shillings at the time, the old age pension. So when you come up, the first job you get, there was a little stubby stout bottles. Remember that? Yeah. Go up for a bottle of stout, and it was a shilling for a last stout at the time.
No, but even speaking about, like, you know, Woolworths. Woolworths was a fabulous place to go.
Oh, it was, wasn't
because
it?
do you remember the...
We used to meet everybody outside Woolworths.
And then you could go in at the sweets and get a little bag, and you could take 2 out of this one and 2 out of that. And that's... Now, I'll never forget that I mentioned that. And I got them before I was catching the Tramore train, because now the Tramore train was like heaven. Just run down and into the train and up around the Donerail. Now, I wouldn't go down on the beach, and over to the, you know, the thing. And that's where I learned to swim and all. Jump in over your depth and catch onto the rope.
So I goes up to Garvey's with me 10 bob and a bottle, and I said, I last out Miss Power, and grand, so I gave her the 10 shillings. And I got 19 shillings change. And I said, excuse me, Miss Power, I said, you're making a mistake. Get out, you cheeky brat. She said, I don't make mistakes. She was full up of whiskey, I suppose. So I went home anyway, and my poor mother now was a very honest poor woman, you know. And I said she'd have to give me the wrong. Oh, he'd bring it back. I said I offered to give it back to her. She told me, get out, you cheeky brat. So she had it up on the mantelpiece for a couple of weeks. And there were days probably she hadn't a penny and she wouldn't touch it in case Julie came down looking for her 10 shillings. But eventually, anyway, to divide it up, I got a half crown out of it. And I went to Tramore with cousins of mine.
February 1853, they decided to build a train between Waterford and Tramore.
And we used to, when we used to go to Tramore on the train if we had the money sometimes. Very, very seldom.
Yeah.
On the beach, then eating our sandwiches.
Full of sand.
And it's 7 miles long, and he finished it in 7 months. A fantastic achievement, given that they had no JCBs in those days.
Well, the thing is, again, when you go down to the train, down the railway square there be so many.
Oh yeah, my mother used to bring us, you know, twice a year. We were lucky, and she'd bring us down. But my mother had 3 or 4 of us, but there'd be about 10 go with her. You know, she'd buy 4 tickets, but be about 10 go on board.
The Waterford station for the Tramore train was just across the river from where we lived. So we used to have what we used to, like stepping stones across the river, and we used to sneak across there, across into a field. And just as the train was pulling out, we used to kind of jump into the train from the opposite side of the station and sneak in, because they would check the tickets as you're getting on the train from the other side. But after that, they'd never check tickets.
I'd be there and I'd be shoving all the kids in, you know, and like they'd ask me then, where's the ticket? And I'd say, my mother's coming behind me.
She come behind me. There was more mothers coming behind me with 1 or 2 tickets, that's it, like, you know.
But that train used to be jam-packed in the summer. You really couldn't get on the train unless you were at the front of a queue, you know.
On the 31st of December 1960, the railway was closed. Now that railway was carrying 424,000 passengers a year. That's passenger journeys.
So we used to sneak up and open the door and just fit in and sit down alongside of some woman, make it look like we were with a crowd of other people, you know. So, but I remember the steam engines. You know, that's giving away my age now. But steam engines used to, you know, you'd hear them 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, this booping, you know.
The locals in Tramore burned an effigy of Todd Andrews, who was the chairman of CIE, out in Tramore, but too late, it was gone. And on Monday morning, the 2nd of January, the men were out breaking up the tracks.
And that's the way it went. Tramore was brilliant. I mean, we went out for a day but I mean, nowadays you can pop in and out when you want, but that was only twice a year, maybe only once a year, you know. And it was a magic time, but you never forgot that, you know.
We used to get a monthly ticket out there, and a lot of us from school would go out and we'd get into the carriages, and you see there were unit carriages then. You couldn't walk from one into another.
But some guys got into one and they knew there was girls the next one, and while the train was moving, opened their door, went along the side of the train. You'd be horrified to see it in the movies, and got into the girls at the next thing.
On rainy days, we wouldn't get out of Tramore at all. We'd come in and out until dinner hour. But we used to have sing songs and things like that, and we used to have great things.